Miami still has much work to do in the transfer portal. Still have yet to sign a player, but I do think Miami will sign a player soon. But who? That's next on the Storm Tracker podcast.
You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. Marcus Benjamin here representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to CanesCounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also, subscribe to this podcast on all platforms, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. We're still in the spring transfer portal window here, so Miami's still looking to add players to its roster, and it's draft week, so we'll talk a little bit about the draft. Love the NFL draft, and Miami is going to make some big splashes here in the NFL draft, and of course, Cam Ward is projected to be the number one overall pick, but will he have the longest career? We'll talk about that as well here on the Storm Tracker podcast, and to talk about it all, I've got Alex Donno, the host of the best podcast besides this one on the internet, the Locked On Canes podcast. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
Marcus, it's my pleasure. And as you know, and I want to remind everybody out there that even though like the last day to enter the portal is April 25th, which is coming up in a couple of days, that's not the deadline to sign. So even if, you could say, and even the guys who put their names in the portal on the 25th, the paperwork may not be finished till like the 27th, right? So even like up until 4 or 5 days from now, when the last of the players enter the portal, you can still have well into the month of May to actually sign players. So the portal madness is going to continue for like another month. We're still going to be in the midst of this craziness.
Right. Just like Mario Cristobal said, the transfer portal is always open. So
that too.
No matter what you hear about the spring portal window closing, it's always open. Players are always looking to, find a new place to get some playing time for the most part. I mean, I think that's kind of the more driving force. There is another driving force as well that, some players kind of take into account when they are looking to transfer for different schools. Miami had a couple of players leave the program. Zaquan Patterson, Nye Carr, Elias Rudolph, even the kicker, Abram Murray, is in the portal as well. That's a bit of a surprise. Joshua Horton is actually already signed with Georgia. He was the first player to reveal that he wanted to be in the portal. So now, and then also Emmanuel Carnley is another player, another defensive back who also decided to jump into the portal from Miami. So now, with these players now departing, it seems as if the needs for Miami has kind of shifted. I think kind of after spring and kind of going into the spring window, you kind of knew that running back was one of the positions of need, as well as wide receiver, just in case you did have any injuries at all. You had some players with experience that could kind of step in and produce. But now with the two defensive backs now gone, has really kind of the focus really shifted to defensive back. Alex, what do you think are really the dire positions of need for the Miami Hurricanes in this transfer portal?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably start at safety, and part of that obviously coincides with the departure of Zaquan Patterson, but I still think that even if Patterson had not left Miami through the transfer portal, I still think there was probably a need to pick up another safety because, again, I don't know if Zaquan, who did miss the majority of spring football with an injury, which makes it a little bit harder to assess exactly where he is heading into this upcoming season. But I don't necessarily guarantee that he would have been a starting safety. Like the one guy that I think we all feel really confident about, who at least looks like a starter, is Zechariah Poyser, who transferred in from Jacksonville State. He had a really good spring, and someone like Dylan Day, I thought had a really good spring, but not necessarily like a surefire starter this year. Markeith Williams, who's been with the program for a long time, had a pretty good spring, but same thing, like not necessarily a surefire starter. Same thing with Zaquan Patterson, who's now departed. So I think that there was a need anyway for a safety, and I think that need got amplified with the departure of Zaquan Patterson, where you wonder if Miami maybe even may look at multiple safeties. So I think that's a need that's been amplified. You mentioned Josh Horton was the first guy to announce he was leaving in the portal. He's already landed at Georgia. A depth piece would have been a depth piece at Miami, a defensive tackle. I think that really puts DT on the microscope. Miami did host Braxton Feely from Boise State for a visit earlier on this week. It sounds like he enjoyed his time here at Miami, but no commitment, no signing yet or anything like that. I think the Hurricanes are, and defensive tackle is always, it's a tough position to get top guys, especially in the late portal, because usually top defensive tackles aren't usually jumping around. That's such like a premium position. But I do think the Hurricanes could use another one there. Remember in the spring portal last year, Miami was able to land Simeon Barrow, who ended up being a pretty good pickup. So, we'll see if they're able to do something like that. I also think linebacker could be a need. Miami's got some good players at that position, but I don't think it's as deep as some of the other spots. So I look at linebacker as being a spot. And then, of course, if you kind of follow the clues based on the types of players Miami's hosting for visits. This week, we had a couple visits, a handful of visits take place on Tuesday. We're having more later throughout the week. It's evident they're going after receivers, right? The outside receivers, which I think is the bigger need, but they're also looking at slot receivers with a guy like Trevor Pena and another guy, Tony Johnson from Cincinnati, who plays mostly in the slot. They're going to be visiting later on this week. So that seems to be a spot. And you also mentioned running back, Marcus, which it's an interesting one because it's not like a grave need where it's like, Miami's not Cal. Did you see Cal lost 5 running backs in the portal in 48 hours? Like Cal needs any running backs. Miami, needs someone to really bolster the depth at that position, because I think we all feel really good about Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle at the top of the rotation. But Miami's only got 4 scholarship running backs. With Chris Wheatley-Humphrey heading into his second year, didn't play much last year, so the experience is limited. And then the 4th scholarship running back is a true freshman, Gerard Pringle. 4 scholarship running backs is a very low number. So, Miami needs another guy, and preferably a guy with some proven talent. They hosted Charmar Brown from North Dakota State, who's a very productive player at the FCS level. He came in for a visit earlier this week. And he did mention he can see a role for himself in Miami. He's also going to be visiting Cal, who has no running backs. So I wonder if he's going to look at Cal and say, "Hey, I could start here." I think there's a couple of other spots he's going to look at, but yeah, I don't know if I left any out. Receiver, running back. I think Miami's good on the offensive line. They're good at tight end. They're good at quarterback, assuming nobody leaves. I think 4 scholarship quarterbacks is where they want to be. I think they're good at defensive end. I think they're good at cornerback, I will say, even though Emmanuel Carnley left. They brought in so many cornerbacks in the winter transfer portal window. I think they can still afford to absorb the Emmanuel Carnley loss, but I think safety is the other spot there. So yeah, those are the areas that I look at as being the biggest needs Miami's got to assess here.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. I think tight end and offensive line are pretty much the 2 position groups that you feel pretty good about, considering the talent that you've seen in the spring and, how they recruit. And in the winter window, they did a really good job when it comes to tight end in the winter window, getting, of course, Luke Nichols' brother, the freshman quarterback's brother, the other nickel. Now you got a double nickel on the team with also Alex Bauman, who they got from Tulane as well. So I think they addressed that need already. But yeah, I think they could probably get a player basically at every position. Cornerback as well. I agree with you. I think they're pretty solid. I think what you do have to consider, though, Alex, is that if you bring a player in, I mean, if I'm a player, and I see, okay, they brought a player in, for my position, then I'm probably going to, see, what my options are. I think that could be a possibility. I mean, we're like you said, you can enter your name all the way until the end of this week here. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's another player from Miami that kind of enters their name in the portal. Like, say if the Brown kid from North Dakota State, the running back, decides to commit to Miami, then I'm not saying I hear anything, but the logic tells me that whoever's lowest on that depth chart that's not a freshman would consider jumping into the portal just to really see what their options are. So that goes for wide receiver as well. If they bring in a Trevor Pena, if they bring in a Tony Johnson, like you mentioned, I think whoever's lowest on that depth chart, or maybe is a borderline starter who's not a freshman, I think you don't be surprised if that player kind of jumps in the portal. It's just the way of the world here, in this new transfer portal era. So you did mention safety, and one of the safeties that Miami is considering is AJ Halsey, and that is a guy that you and I are both very high on. What are your thoughts on Miami? Miami's interest in Halsey, and how do you think he can add value to this program?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line with AJ Halsey is, there's basically two different profiles of players Miami's been looking at in the portal. Like, there have been certain guys like Noah King, who's also a safety who visited this week, literally has not played at the college level. It would essentially be like another high school recruit, class of 2025 guy who just signed with Kansas State, has decided to leave Kansas State, the transfer portal. So there are certain guys like that the staff is looking at, like, hey, there are certain players with 3-4 years of eligibility. We can mold them and develop them. Whereas AJ Halsey is someone I would expect could come into Miami or wherever he lands and be an impact starter. He's got already, I think, 3 years of experience under his belt. This player was first team all Big 12 last year, had 5 interceptions. He's got a good body type for that position. He's 6 foot, 215 pounds. He's sturdy. And the other thing about AJ Halsey that I think should be appreciated is he's got familiarity with one of Miami's defensive backs coaches, because Zach Etheridge, who's now primarily coaching the cornerbacks at Miami, but he and Will Harris are kind of splitting up those duties in the secondary. But Zach Etheridge was the position coach for Halsey at Houston. So I also that keeps you up to speed on the evaluation, right? Because who better to evaluate AJ Halsey than a guy who's coached him? And if Halsey does end up at Miami, he knows what to expect from his position coaching, and he'll know he's a good fit here. So I think the opportunity there is really, really good. I mean, there are other safeties that have been mentioned with Miami, like Gregory Smith out of Florida, who's barely played. He's 1 year out of high school guy, or Noah King, who's right out of high school. But the difference, I think, with Halsey and why I want to go out and get this guy is he's got experience. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. And he's a guy that you could theoretically, I know every job has to be earned, and I respect that process, but theoretically, you could probably pencil him into a starting lineup, next to the corner, the safety from Jackson State that Miami added. Well, I don't know why his name is escaping me right now. Zechariah Poyser, the other ZP. You could pencil him into a starting lineup with Poyser. Yeah, and I think he could project and play really well here. So Halsey, for those reasons, is a guy that I really like.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you make a good point with just him being familiar with Zach Etheridge. I mean, I think that is definitely a factor here for Miami. You kind of would love to see a safety of this guy's caliber. And we're watching highlights here on the YouTube channel, where kind of see his physicality. You see where he just kind of, he lays the wood on you. And that's the type of physicality that you kind of lost with a Zaquan Patterson. Zaquan Patterson was basically that type of guy, very physical, and rangy as well. Was still kind of developing. Obviously, he was a freshman from last year and was going into his second year. But to have a guy like Halsey, if indeed he is added to the roster, I think this team doesn't really miss a beat, and they need that type of, I think, hard hitting safety to really kind of add to this roster, along with the safeties that they already have. Miami also, I think, lacks a little bit of explosiveness. Miami's kind of synonymous with explosiveness. If you kind of think about, the Miami Hurricanes historically. I saw something on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days, the other day, that Miami had by far and away the most kick returners, or kick returns for touchdowns in the NFL were from my former Miami Hurricanes. So that kind of tells you right there just the history of just how explosive players come out of Miami. But as of late, you really haven't seen it as much. So one of the explosive players that is on the market is Keon Moran, the BYU player. So, what are your thoughts on him, and what do you think that he could really add to this program?
Yeah, he intrigues me, especially for the special teams angle. His main position is wide receiver, which also happens to be like an area of need and an area of interest. I don't necessarily think just at that receiver spot, just based on what I've seen of him and know of him, that he necessarily like would walk into Miami's starting lineup, which is okay because you also need depth, right? But when it comes to his kick returning abilities, electric. Took 2 kick returns to the house last year for BYU. And yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, I was, very spoiled for a lot of years, watching players like Santana Moss, Roscoe Parrish, of course, Devin Hester, the greatest of all time. And yeah, I mean, Miami football over the years in a lot of ways has been synonymous with great kick returning. And, I know we all had, I think, pretty high hopes last year, with former Miami running back and kick returner Chris Johnson, who moved out of Miami to SMU in the transfer portal in the winter, but just didn't find that success. Like, ran very fast, but just didn't really show the wiggle and the sizzle that he needed to take some kicks to the house. So there was a little something missing there, despite his speed. And of course, with Johnson no longer being on the team, there's definitely an opening there. And Keon Moran is someone who I'm extra intrigued in for that reason, because, people take for granted that phase of the game. And it's not obviously just returnings. It's also the ability to block kicks. It's the ability to make kicks. You mentioned Miami lost a kicker, Abram Murray, into the transfer portal. They do have another kicker on scholarship, Carter Davis, who transferred in from FAU, who had a pretty good spring. And I guess it's easy to take kicker for granted after we've just had 5 years of Borregales brothers, right? Where they were automatic. There's no more Borregali left. And so we're in the post era here, and we're hoping, Carter Davis, or I guess it's possible maybe Miami could add another kicker, but I'm going to assume it's Carter Davis's job now. You hope he lives up to it. But yeah, I mean, to be able to get a couple kick return touchdowns this year, because Miami gave some up last year. So, you'd like to see those go the other direction. It's one of the reasons why Keon Moran, to me, is a guy that I'm very intrigued in.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued in him as well. Right now, you would assume that Ray Joseph is going to get another opportunity at kick return, along with maybe Malachi Toney. Dalen Upshaw is another player that we've seen manning the kick returns, as well as Gerard Pringle. All viable options, but those are all guys that you probably want to, I guess maybe just keep on the shelf, and not really risk too much injury. And especially with most of them having limited experience with returning on the college football level, to get a guy with experience, I think will be vital. I think the special teams is underrated, and I think Miami should definitely invest in him, not only just from a kick return standpoint, but from a wide receiver standpoint as well, where this guy can just be a plug and play guy. So I definitely would like to see Miami kind of make some moves with Keon Marion. Could be another great player to play for the Orange and Green. There are a ton of great players that played for the Orange and Green last season, and I think the NFL has certainly recognized that. Of course, I mentioned that Cam Ward is very, very, very likely going to be the number one pick taken by the Tennessee Titans on Thursday night. And there are several other players that are projected to be drafted as well. Just before we get into another question that I want to ask you, Alex, how many players do you think Miami gets drafted on throughout the week?
I think the most hopeful estimate, and I hope it does play out this way, would be Miami gets 11 players drafted, and I'm hoping it kind of plays out chalk that way, because so we see it over the years. Sometimes when you get into those late rounds, it gets a little crazy. Like there have been some guys the last couple of years, like Matt Lee last year being an example of someone I expected to get drafted. He didn't, and he ended up having a good year anyway with Cincinnati as an undrafted free agent. So
Yeah,
it ended up working out for him, but that doesn't always play out that way. So the guys that I look at as and some of them are locks. Like Cam Ward is not only, of course, a lock to get drafted, he seems like a lock to go first overall. I don't think there's any mystery at this point heading
right.
into it. The Tennessee Titans are drafting Cam Ward. Elijah Arroyo is going to get drafted. He was one of the biggest risers in the postseason when it comes to pre-draft workouts and stuff. And I think really the only reservation any team could have on Arroyo was, the injury history he had like early in his college career, but he
Right.
persevered through all of that and just had an awesome, junior season, final season at Miami last year. So he's going to be drafted for sure. Xavier Restrepo is going to get drafted. Maybe, I don't know, not quite as high. Maybe this is, again, what do I know? But again, like, maybe the 40 time at Pro Day might have, maybe hurt his stock a little bit, but Restrepo is going to get drafted and hopefully second day. Damian Martinez at running back, I believe, will get drafted. Jalen Rivers should definitely be drafted. Can play guard or tackle at the NFL level, may project as more of a guard. I do believe Tyler Barron will be drafted, second or third day at some point. Despite the fact that it's a little unpredictable with kickers, I think Andy Borregales will be drafted. Where, I don't know, but I find it, he's had a great career at Miami and also a great, pre-draft process. I think Borregales is hopefully going to sneak in as a kicker into the end of the draft. And then, I guess you've got some guys beyond those names who are a little bit less certain. I'd like to think Simeon Barrow is going to get drafted, had a good year at Miami. I was just a little bit surprised. Like, he wasn't invited to a lot of stuff. Like, I thought he was snubbed from the Combine and from All-Star. I don't remember if he was invited to the East-West Shrine, but I know he was snubbed from the Combine, which was very surprising to me. I think Barrow should be drafted, but there's no guarantees. Kiko hopefully will get drafted. I know his stock was actually higher probably coming out of his junior year than it was his senior year. But I think Kiko's performed pretty well, but it's not a guarantee. I think Sam Brown and Jacoby George both, could and should get drafted. But, some of like the last maybe 3 or 4 names that I mentioned, it could get a little bit touch and go because, again, it's hard to predict some of these late rounds. But I think that's 11 names I threw out there that should be drafted. I expect probably at least 8 or 9 of those to definitely get drafted over the next 3 days.
Yeah, I think you pretty much kind of hit it on the head there. Jacoby George, I think, is the one that I think could probably sneak into this draft just because, he's got the speed, man, and he's still a really good route runner, has great hands. I think he could be a late rounder for me. I agree with you. I think it's really going to go Ward, Arroyo, Martinez, Restrepo, Rivers. I think you can definitely lock those guys in as 2025 draftees. It gets a little murky after that. I do believe Barron is a guy that should be drafted just from his physical traits, but sometimes during the season last season, you just kind of forgot he was there, so I'm not quite sure if he gets drafted. I think he will go late round, but I think Jacoby George is a guy that, that's an interesting one to kind of watch to see if he indeed gets drafted. Obviously he's a hometown kid, so we're rooting for him to be drafted to not only represent the U, but represent the, South Florida. He is out of Plantation High School down here, so all the other guys, I think, will probably likely be undrafted free agents. When you talk about Simeon Barrow and Sam Brown, those guys, I feel like those guys probably very likely will be undrafted free agents just because there's just so much talent coming out of college football these days. It's not that these guys are not talented. It's just that some of these other guys have been probably in the limelight maybe a little bit more throughout their careers than some of the aforementioned guys. But of all of these aforementioned guys, just in your opinion, Dono, who do you think has the best career, the best NFL career?
Well, here's one I'll say could have the longest NFL career by the nature of the position he plays, Andy Borregales. I mean,
Okay.
and hopefully, and I know his brother Jose, I feel like hasn't gotten nearly enough NFL opportunities because it's hard. Like the thing about being a kicker is teams carry one, right? I mean, it's very, very rare these days for an NFL team to carry more than one kicker. So you're literally competing for one of 32 jobs.
Yeah,
And, once a guy gets into that kicking fraternity, even if the team cuts them, usually when you're already in, it's like the NBA coaching carousel or something. It's like the same guys you see pop. So it's hard to break into that fraternity. But I think if Andy Borregales can break into that 32-man kicking fraternity, you can kick till you're 40-something these days, right? In
yeah,
terms of the best career, not the most exciting answer, but, I know that some people see risk potential with Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward's going to have a great NFL career because, something people try to pick him apart for certain reasons, the gunslinger mentality, the risk taking. But I think that's part of what makes him so special is that, yeah, every now and then he'll make a throw where you're like, oh, shouldn't have made that decision. But then he'll also complete a throw where you're like, wow, I can't believe he made that decision and he executed it. Not to mention, Ward's ability to really feel pressure and just escape, elude pressure, extend plays, and extend the pocket. I think he's going to be special at the NFL level. I know he's not like the most conventional quarterback, so people kind of wonder, is there bust potential there? Just knowing how hard Cam Ward works and just how dedicated he is to his craft and how physically gifted he is, I think he's going to have a great NFL career. I think a guy who's going to end up having like a sneaky good NFL career is Damian Martinez because he's so powerful. And I know like running back is not like the best longevity position, so you kind of grade
right.
that differently. For a lot of guys, once you get around 30, teams just stop really giving you opportunities. But I think Damian Martinez with his combination of physicality and burst, and he does have more speed. You saw him take that run to the house in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I think a lot of people thought, wow, okay, this guy moves a little faster than we thought he does. I think Martinez has just a great NFL type body and the combination of physicality and burst. So I think that's someone who's going to end up, even at a position that gets devalued, is going to end up having a sneaky good NFL career.
Yeah, for me, it's Elijah Arroyo, man. I really feel like
It's a good
he's
one.
probably going to have the longest career because tight end, as far as the top tier level of tight end, there's really not that many anymore. I felt like there was like so many back in the day, but now you could probably name maybe 5 or 6 who are really truly elite tight ends. So I think Arroyo has a chance to really be an elite tight end. I think he could get better as far as blocking is concerned, but when it comes to catching the football and like yards after catch and traits of that nature. I think he is one of the best that you'll see at the position. So I think that's going to be really coveted by these NFL teams. And if it doesn't work out with his first team, I think another team will certainly definitely take a chance on Arroyo. I really feel like he will have a really long career. And then Jalen Rivers. I mean, these offensive linemen tend to have longer careers as well. So I could see him getting on a team and just kind of continuing his career. I think he is versatile, can also play center as well if need be. So I do think that Jalen Rivers has a chance to have a really long career at Miami. So it'll be exciting. And I love the NFL draft. I'm really excited to kind of see where these players fall in these next upcoming days. The first round of the draft starts tomorrow, Thursday night, and will run Friday and of course Saturday with the later round. So should be hearing a lot of Miami Hurricanes names being called in the next few days.
Yeah, and I almost I feel like I haven't like from a work and content related thing. I feel like I haven't done enough when it comes to pre-draft coverage, because it coincides with the stuff that's happening right now from Miami in terms of transfer portal. There's so much going on with recruiting, so it's like I almost feel like I'm maybe not maximizing just the opportunity to really praise and celebrate Cam Ward and all of these other guys, because it's not every day you get a first overall pick. And, again, spoiler alert, it's going to happen. Miami is going to have a guy drafted first overall. So I want to use these next 36 hours or so to cram out as much content as possible, because I think from Cam Ward to Arroyo, Restrepo, Rivers, everybody, I think they deserve to be celebrated, because I do think Miami's going to have a good showing coming up in this draft.
Yeah, definitely tune into CanesCounty.com. I definitely have some stuff kind of lined up in the pipeline for the draft. I'm kind of a draft guy, like I'm one of those guys who will watch the entire draft. I'm one of those nerds. So I'm excited for it. I am definitely going to have something on Cam Ward, so make sure you look for that on CanesCounty.com. That is going to wrap it up for this edition of the Storm Tracker podcast. Of course, Alex Donno from the Locked On Canes podcast joining me today. Appreciate you coming on with me once again, and hope to see you again soon.
It's my pleasure, man, and we'll have to get you back on Locked On Canes pretty soon, Marcus, because you always do awesome work, and I appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, Alex. And that is, like I said, going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30, and also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.